All right, well, I will go ahead and get started. Hi, everyone. Again, my name is James Greenwood. I am currently the Dean of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at Western Reserve Academy in Hudson, Ohio, Kenyon class of 2002, originally from Cleveland, Ohio. And in terms of my path to education and being in education more formally, I think it very much starts with Kenyon in a lot of ways. So one of the ways that I found Kenyon was through a program that existed, formerly called the SCAP program. But I did that program as a student the summer between my junior and senior year of high school. It was a 3-week summer program that was really designed to be a pre-college experience for kids from Cleveland and Columbus and other areas. And so I did that. That's really how I found Kenyon and sort of put Kenyon on the map. I have a former teacher from that program here on the call as well. So excited to see you, Portia. But that was really sort of put Kenyon on my map. And then when I became a Kenyon student, I went back and worked that same program as a RA, teaching assistant, et cetera, during the summers while I was a student there. And that's really where sort of that formal sort of bug for teaching really got started. And at the end of that time, sort of Peter Rutkoff, who many of us know as well, suggested that education might be your thing after this. And he was the one who suggested boarding schools and independent schools in particular. Independent schools because you could teach with sort of out the certification and the graduate work at that point. So although I ultimately went back to grad school, I wasn't necessarily immediately interested in doing that after Kenyon. So that was part A in terms of independent schools. And then boarding schools because they would provide your food and housing. And as I had grown accustomed to food and housing, it seemed like a really worthwhile venture. And so that's how I found my way to boarding schools. And I have stayed in them for almost 21 years now with a 3-year stint in a day school. But that's a little bit about me and my journey to education.
All righty, well, I will just chime in. My story, well, first of all, my name is Kamille Harless. I am class of 99 from Kenyon. And I was a molecular biology major with a concentration in African and African-American studies. And I say that to say that when I went to Kenyon, I was pre-med, like that was what I was gonna be. I was going to be a doctor. And then Peter Rutkoff, again, I'm going to bring up that name, got me to teach SCAP. And I started to teach the program between or during the summers of my years as a student at Kenyon. And my first year there, I had the privilege of teaching Mr. James Greenwood, who you just heard speak. And for years, each summer, I just fell in love with teaching. Watching the kids get chemistry, which is what I taught, which is oftentimes a hard subject for students to get and to see that I had a gift of conveying the information to students, started to put the bug in me. I will say that I resisted it. My mom is a retired teacher. She's on the call too. She's not on the panel, but she is on the call. I see her face now, but she's class of 73, you know, that famous class of 73, and she's a retired English instructor. But watching her grade all those essays all of my life made me like, I don't think I want to do this. So I actually worked in admissions for 2 years at Kenyon, couldn't shake the bug, then went to grad school. My first year of teaching was at a public school in rural PA, and we'll get to that in, later on in the panel. And then I transitioned into independent schools, and it's just been a great experience. I think that my thing, and this is not to degrade any type of education, but my thing for loving the independent school environment, there's just a little less, I hate to say, well, maybe it is the right word, but a little less bureaucracy to have to deal with, and smaller class sizes and things like that. So that's what's kept me there. And I also teach now where I went to school. So I'm at my alma maters that has something to do with it too.
Is it my turn? My name is Hope Harrod, and I am class of 1998. I was a history major and an African American Studies concentrator. I'm currently a teacher with DC Public Schools, which is where I've been for the past 21 years. I've been teaching 4th and 5th grade for all of that time. My path to education is interesting because I went to Kenyon thinking that I would be an English major and write books. It's kind of what I thought I wanted to do. But I think that having the experience of participating in seminars was something that I had had a little bit of experience with in high school, but I think it really came to life for me, and it became something that made me think about the experiences that kids have in school. And I thought, I really enjoyed the idea of being able to have discussions and bounce ideas off of other people in the room. And I thought, this is really meaningful. And I wonder if this is something that we can do for little kids, like, can we start this early? Can we get them really critically thinking at a young age? Is it possible for me to replicate this experience of sitting in a room with a bunch of people wrestling with the text with younger kids? And that got me thinking about the idea of teaching. And as I will say, Peter Redkoff was the person who helped sort of me figure out my path to making that happen. At the time that I came to Kenyon, there wasn't a lot of information about public school teaching. There were really only routes to independent schools. And I had gone to a private school for all of my life, but I really had decided that part of me really wanted to be able to access children who didn't have the same opportunities that I did. And so my route was, I was interested in public school. And so I went to graduate school, and then that's how I became a teacher in DC public schools.
Awesome, thank you. So I would describe my path. Hello, everybody. My name is Ronald Maheia, class of 2012, graduated. So my cohort is 2012, graduated in 13. I'm also proud Kenyon Alumni Council member as well. So my path to education is I would describe non-traditional. There was a series of fortunate events that I would say that positioned me to where I am today. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Peter Redkoff as well. My first introduction to education came my senior year with the Sankofa project, Theory and Practice of Urban Education. It was the first of its kind, to my knowledge, seminar course, and that really gave me an opportunity to learn a little bit more about public school education. And I was an American Studies major at the time, and so all the intersections that related to that. I am currently a director of talent and HR. I started out in teaching. How I got there, again, through a series of fortunate events. I had an opportunity to teach English and Greece on the Anatolia College Fellowship, and then I was trying to figure out, well, what am I going to do with my life? My year is ending on the fellowship. What will I do? And so I applied to a national education nonprofit known as City Year. And for those who are familiar, it's a wonderful organization with sites all across the country who go into areas of high need to serve students with a holistic approach. So I did that for a year and ended up learning that I wanted to continue working with young people, and allowed me the opportunity to become a special education teacher for a number of years. And then I transitioned into school administration. Long story short, school admin burned me out in that setting. That may come out later on in this discussion about why that burnout took place. But the universe said, Ronald, we are not done with you in the world of education. So we want you to pivot to talent and HR. We want you to be able to identify high quality instructors to be able to put in front of our young people and provide them the education that they deserve. So that's just a high level view of your boy, Ronald Maheia.
Thank you, Ron. So I'll round it out. So I'm Janae Peters. I graduated in 2010. I was an English major, and it's really interesting. What I'm seeing when I look out here is just all the intersections of my world. And when I think of why I'm in education, like many of you are literally here on this Zoom as part of the conduits for me. So Portia Morgan as one of my high school teachers, James, who's literally been a constant in my life since I was 15 years old, Sarah Haidt Gone as a former student. Like, I just think of all of those intersections and how they came to be. And I think I'm one of those people in the world who, I don't know, I feel like every decision, whether I knew it or not at any given time, was kind of leading towards education. Although when I was applying to Kenyon, my personal data form said that I wanted to be a French biology or psychology major, kind of like James in that way. But I remember at that time, my mom saying like, why do you want to do psychology? And I'm like, oh, I want to help people. It was very much like that. And she said, you've never seen a psychologist. How do you know that they help people? And I was like, that's what they do. And she said, but who has helped you? And when I looked back at that question, like when I really reflected on that question at that time, I really thought of my teachers. And in high school, that was where I learned so much about mentorship and being open to mentorship. And then when I got to Kenyon, that was like, it was full force for me, both in the ways that I sought out mentorship and the ways I just learned about what I needed. So when I think of why I'm in education, I work in independent schools like Kamille and James. I'm in my 13th year. And I'm pretty squarely a dean of students right now. It's my first year not actively teaching, which I don't love, but here we are. But when I think of why I'm where I am, it's similar to James in that it was something I could do right after college. And actually it's because James called me and said, you should check out this school. I was planning to apply to PhD programs. I think I was always thinking educator, but the where, when, and why actually didn't really matter to me. I was just trying to find my way. But I got to experience boarding schools and liked that idea of the food and the housing coming out of college at the time that I did. And part of what's kept me there all of this time has been just like that. I'm a person who really appreciates being rocked. Like that started for me with Silverweed, reading Beloved, like that rocked me. Education every year kind of rocks you, like it challenges you to do something different, to explore, to figure out how to serve and support students, how to grow, shift, and change for yourself. And so that's actually kind of what's kept me here. That's interesting to me. And it's interesting to figure out what it looks like to stay in it at a time where not a lot of people are. So I'm gonna stop that there. And then we're gonna move into some of the questions from you all. And the first one I'm going to start with is asking what support or mentorship was important early in your career, and what support or resources do you wish you could have had? And so, Kamille, how do you feel about starting this one off?
So so I know what support I wish I could have had because of what I did not have. So my first year of teaching, I mentioned to you that I was at a rural school in Pennsylvania. I teach high school, I teach chemistry, as I said. I was in rural PA to be with my then boyfriend, now spouse, just to be closer to him. And the teaching jobs around there, he coached in rural PA. This was a district where you had one high school, one middle school, both of which were in the same building. The high school took the top floor, the middle school took the bottom floor, and one elementary school. I was the only person who didn't go to one of the local state schools around there, but more importantly, I was the only person of color in the entire district. And it was a very, Janae talked about being rocked. I was rocked. That was the years, and I was also the only chemistry teacher in the district too. So those two things. So you get being the only teacher of color, and then you're also the only teacher of a subject that most students frankly don't like. So being there, every student was required to take the course. Even those students who had learning differences were probably going to not go to college and be more vocational and would go vocational. And it was just rough. I had no one to like relate to. I had no one who had an experience like mine that didn't go to one of the state schools there. I was the only person of color. And it was in that school that I was first dealt with my first direct experience with racism, when one of the students wrote, my maiden name is Johnson, wrote "Johnson is the N-word" on my wall. And that's when I knew that I was not going to stay. And I didn't know what my next job was going to be, but I knew that that 1 year in that school was it. And it was, and then that's when I transitioned to independent schooling in Pittsburgh. That's where I was first. And there still weren't a lot of faculty of color, especially in the sciences, but I did have support. I had the support of an amazing man who recently passed, Bill Deal, who's also a Kenyon alum. And he sat right next to me and helped me learn how to teach science. And it didn't have to be a person of color, but someone who knew that I was new, who empathized, and who carried me through. And so that experience of my first year, who just had someone who was willing to recognize that my experience was not the same, that I did not have, that has been what's so important my second year and throughout this day.
Thank you, Kamille. I'm happy to answer that one too. So one of the things, so when I first started teaching high school, I was 21, fresh out, and I was teaching up to postgrad. So I had one of my first students was actually 19 when I first started teaching. But the way my first school was set up, I was an intern, and mentorship was really formalized and structured in that space, and that made all the difference. And I actually had two mentors, and I had one who had been teaching 41 years and was just like the one everyone went to. It was kind of loosey-goosey. I hope he doesn't see this. I don't know that he would describe his style like that. And then my other mentor was actually the dean of faculty, who was more structured. And what I loved about that, and I don't know that I would have said that I loved it at the time, but retrospectively, what I loved about it was that I got to see both ends of the spectrum and got to make some decisions for myself based on what I liked about each of those things. And one of the things that really mattered early on was learning about myself, like learning about myself as a teacher, as an educator, as opposed to as a student. Like that information was really important too. But there's a lot that kind of has to change when you, and I don't know if I want, actually, I've learned not to speak in absolutes. I think that there is a lot that can change when you shift from being a student to a teacher, but the learning is still central there. And I appreciated people who kept reminding me to have a learning posture, to be curious about students, about my colleagues, at times where I just wanted to have some convictions and be mad. And to that question, what support or resources do I wish I could have had? There were a lot of, again, I'm a seeker, and that has mattered to me. One of the things that I did on my own was I looked at the way James, I got to work with James when I first started teaching. I looked at him as an advisor, him as a dorm head. And I looked at another colleague, Sandy Messer, as an advisor. And I looked at Ellen Turner, who, like, to me is like one of the people who demonstrate care the most in education. And I did this sort of on my own. James, you might remember this. I started what I called Project Care, which was figuring out how to demonstrate care for other people's children. And to me, it had to be formulaic. Like, I had to learn that that's how I worked. But that wasn't something that I felt was super explicit. It was something that I created and did. And I don't know that that being formalized would have been helpful either. But I think it mattered to me to feel able to seek and to use the example of others and acknowledge that too. The next question is, what kind of person will last? So the question was, what kind of person will last? And I added in education as it's becoming. And I'm wondering, Hope, if you feel ready to answer that one.
Yeah, I think someone who is really I think that people who are the most successful are people who are willing to sort of march at their own beat. People who are not afraid to do what they believe is right. I say that from experience, and I think if you were to talk to other people about sort of what I do in my classroom, I think I do have a very different approach to instruction. And I think that's the thing that has made it possible for me to exist. I think if you fall prey to the bureaucracy of a public school system, it will eat you up. I feel that you really have to develop the skill to be able to identify who the strong leaders are and go with them. Because in any school, if you have a weak leader, that will be the end of you and that will be the end of your experience. And by strong leader, it doesn't even need to be someone who, knows everything about everything and even is really good at what you do. But I think a strong leader is someone who doesn't get in your way and someone who really advocates for you and tries really hard to filter out all of the nonsense so that you don't have to deal with it. As teachers, as a public school, elementary school teacher, there's a lot of nonsense that comes my way. And my principal, who, is a great guy, but he couldn't do my job. And I wouldn't ask him to. I'm happy that he's just doing everything that he can to make it so that I can just do what I do every day. So I think you have to be savvy in that respect if you really want to do this for the long haul, because otherwise you're not going to make it.
James, you want to take that one on next?
Sure. And actually, what I'll do is echo a lot of the things you just said, Jay, and sort of your last bit of commentary as well. When you talked about the sort of project care, right? I think that is one of the things that I do think sort of has to be at the center of it, right? You have to care about people, and more pointedly, you have to care about kids and like kids, right? I think there is a surprising number of folks in education who you would think it goes without saying that people in education like children, but not necessarily. And so I think that is something in terms of people are going to have longevity, and it are people who do have sort of that interest, that curiosity in kids, who see kids and students as people. And not necessarily just as, vessels for us to fill with information and knowledge, but really those who have like rich inner working lives and to be interested in that and to care about that. I think sort of some of you mentioned about the lifelong learners and sort of being curious about ideas and really continuing to think about how do you continue to both think about things in new and exciting ways, but also transmit that information. Like that has to charge you up to want to do that and to get excited about doing that. Hope just mentioned some of that sort of, for lack of a better word, resiliency that you have to have, because there are inevitably going to be challenges, regardless of what type of system you're in. There are going to be frustrating challenges that emerge, and certainly as a person of color and as a Black person in this, so it frequently is racialized. And so being able to have the wherewithal to deal with some of this, but also the resourcefulness to figure out how you're going to navigate that, how you're going to hold strong in your own personal core and integrity as you deal with those things. I think like having that sense of self and that identity, and that comes from what you said, Janae, about knowing yourself and really doing that reflection in that sort of way. So I think those are some of those things. And with the resourcefulness, I like that, think about that in lots of different ways, right? The ability to find your people, but also the ability to sort of get creative if you're in situations where you don't necessarily have the funding or resources that you would like. All of those sort of things that you can really be sort of have a go-get-iveness and sort of a entrepreneurial spirit in terms of how you solve problems and those sorts of things in the community. And I say that piece is also sort of necessary and goes hand in hand with the care of kids piece, because I do think there are lots of people who do care about kids, but just because of all the bureaucracy and all the other things like that, and don't necessarily stay in these situations. So I think those are some of the pieces that come to my mind in terms of like how and who, what type of person will last in these positions and in schools.
Thank you, James. We're moving into another question for all. And Lynn, I want to acknowledge, I see your question. I'm going to try to get it in a little later. The next question for all is, what from your experience with or without a Black teacher in your K through 12 experience do you bring to your teaching approach or to your approach to education?
I could tackle this one first. So in retrospect, when I became a teacher, I hadn't really thought about what it meant to be a teacher of color. I hadn't even reflected on the past Black teachers or teachers of color that I may have had previously. But what this question makes me think about are the moments that I had with my teachers of color, particularly the Black male teachers that I had, and the way that they provided instruction and the way that they provided those socio-emotional learning moments for me that a white teacher was not able to do in the exact same way. And so when we say that representation matters, it absolutely does matter, especially when we have students of color who are needing a particular type of voice that they aren't seeing in the classrooms. The majority of our teaching population is, I think, 80% white women, and it doesn't reflect the communities that we have across America, and especially in the urban public education system. And so what we do need is more representation, that have people who can better connect with our students and have more relatable moments. And not to say that a white person couldn't do that, but it's just a little bit different. It's just a little bit different. And when you have that balance in your school building, and when you have that diversity and mindset and experiences, you're providing an opportunity for everybody to learn, for both students and teachers. And there's a lot more that goes into that, but Hope talked about having a leader that allows them to do what they do. And so when you have a strong principal or school leader in the building who is intentional about creating diverse, equity, and inclusive environments, you see better results. You see higher quality teaching, and you see greater student outcomes.
I'll jump in here too. So as you may remember, I said I teach where I went to high school. So I went to my school from 7th through 12th grades. And as you see, and as I said, I have a love of science. Like, science is what I teach. I still teach high school chemistry. And as you can imagine, when I was going through there from 89 through 95, I don't think I had one Black science teacher at all. But I had great teachers, and I had caring teachers. So it was enough for me to stay there and to really stay committed to the subject. So from my experience, without having a lot of Black instructors in general, but then especially not in science, this may sound arrogant, but I'm going to say it. My thing when I go into that classroom is to be good at what I do. If I'm good at what I do, then not only am I setting an example for those Black students that I teach that are in the minority, to show them that yes, a woman of color can succeed in science and know their stuff, but even subconsciously, those white students, they'll have in the back of their minds who their good chem teacher was, and who they understood and who they related to. And they may not realize it. I mean, we just did our mid-year survey, and the thing that delighted me was that they said that I have helped kids who don't like science grow more confidently in the subject area. The other piece is that I recognize, as I said already, I mean, my mom will tell you, I'm the only one in my family who likes science. Everyone else is English, art, and music. Like, I'm it. So I do know that it is not a popular thing, but the students do an amazing job of separating me from the subject. And so that makes me more relatable. The other part of my school life that does take up more of my time now is that I'm also Dean of Student Life of the high school where I teach. And I have to do discipline, but also let the students know it's coming from a place of love. And my Black students know that they can come to me for anything. And yes, there have been times I've had to put out the discipline, but they know that I'm there. So that's been the big thing. It goes into you got to be better than most, do twice as much just to have a foot in the room. But the big thing is to be good at what I do, because if I'm not going to be judged the same way, and it leaves an imprint on those students that yeah, she's Black, but she knows what she's doing. And not but, and no but about it.
I'll build on some of what both Kamille and Ronald said, is that, you know, I think there is that importance again of both the care piece and sort of like the demonstrating that what you're doing for kids is coming out of a place of care. And sometimes that can be, again, in the way of holding people accountable, right? That way that we make sure that we perhaps tell them some difficult news, or sort of there's this notion of the warm demander, right? That like you actually are holding people accountable while you're also still demonstrating that warmth and care and love for them. So I think that's something that I try to like bring from the experience that I had. unlike folks sort of who've said they didn't have sort of that experience with lots of teachers of color, growing up in the Cleveland public school system, I actually did have quite a few teachers of color. When I see every so often online this sort of survey about when did you have your first Black teacher, for me, it was kindergarten. So I felt really just affirmed in that way. And really, in a lot of ways, my career in education is really a love letter to Black women, because there were so many Black women who were such a key part of my growing up and my educational experience. Again, I'm fortunate to have one of my former teachers, Portia Morgan, on this call right now, who has been a mentor and other mother in those ways that I think were really helpful and fulfilling in this career and sort of in my going to school. So I know how important that was for me, and sort of then being able to carry that on to the work that I do in schools as well. And so I'm also fortunate, like Janae said, to have former students and people I've taught that are on this call or now at Kenyon or whatever else. And frankly, I've been really thrilled to see so many go into education as well. Like from our previous school, Janae and I mentioned being at Northfield Mount Hermon, there's a disproportionate number of students of color, and I'd say particularly Black and brown boys, who are now in education or teaching in schools and places. And I know that a lot of that has to do with sort of the experience they had in terms of working and seeing with me. And I've been blessed for them to be able to share that information with them. So again, I think that's the pieces of some of the pieces from my experience that both drew me to education, that sustains me in education, and that I hope to emulate in my craft as an educator as well.
I'm happy to follow James. We went to all the same schools, so including Kenyon. But similar to James, my first Black teacher was in kindergarten and preschool before then. And I think for core teachers, it was kindergarten, second grade, fourth grade. It was like every other year. I had those strong presences. And when I think about my approach to teaching and my approach to education, the things that I learned, and especially like in high school and middle school too. Miss King, my French teacher, was my dog, also Miss Spencer Clark. But when I think of all of the Black educators who I felt connected to, like it mattered to me that they allowed me to see them as more than a teacher, like not just the lesson that they were giving, but like a whole person with whole experiences. And what mattered even more was that they saw me in all my experiences and held me accountable in the ways that I needed to be held accountable. And when I think of what I learned from them, I know how much that had to do with how I continue to enter spaces. Kamille, there was something that you said about like being a dean of students and having to do things with discipline. And I think about that a lot. Like, how do you hold space for people who are growing and who have big lives that are impacted by the systemic oppression of our world and be held accountable for a moment, for an experience, for the need for learning. And I learned so much of that from some of the Black educators I had in K through 12. One of the things, since Portia Morgan is on the call, she always like really had us thinking a lot about the company we kept, like the friends we had around us. And she would joke and call us frick, frack, and fro, but you know, like the things like that to also make us sit down and actually pay attention and attend to what needed to be done in the classroom. But that level of seeing us beyond like the test that we took or the homework that we did or didn't turn in, like that mattered. And that to me, that warm demander idea is something that I got especially from Black educators in my world. Hope you're welcome to answer, but you don't have to.
I didn't really have a lot of Black teachers in my life. Throughout my education, I may have had one. And I didn't, when I became a teacher, I was very aware that it was important for Black students, including myself, to be able to see myself reflected in the classroom. And that's even more of a reason why I became a teacher for Black and brown children. That's pretty much it.
Thank you. All right, we're going to move more explicitly into some attendee questions again. So the next one, and Ron hinted at this, is connected to or close to the question, or maybe the other side of the question Christine Prini was asking. So that question was, can you address how we can bring more teachers of color into the profession? the question that we are focused on is actually like turnover trends in education that are specific to Black women. So that was a question from the audience. And the question is, do we know what educators are doing after leaving? I want to invite folks who answer this to expand on that in whatever ways you want to. So do we also know why people are staying? Do we also know just what's happening? However you want to engage that. And Ron, I'm wondering if you would be ready to start us off.
Sure. So we're losing people daily. That's the reality, especially in the urban education space. So just for some context, I currently work in a charter school setting, and I've also worked in the public school setting. So I've seen both sides. I've experienced the bureaucracy, and I've seen the autonomy that charter schools have as well. And that being said, we're both losing teachers. And the reality is because for a number of different reasons. One is salary, so that's like an issue. But two, particularly I can speak to Milwaukee public schools, or at least the Milwaukee area. The climate of our schools is not a safe and inviting space for our teachers. And so it's incredibly difficult for folks to want to stay in a place where they don't feel safe and where they don't feel supported, where they don't feel valued, where they don't feel like they have the resources that they need to be their authentic selves and best serve our students. And so that's really hard. And from a personal story, I was a special education teacher for 3 years, and then I later transitioned to school administration. And after my second year in school admin, I was done. I was so burnt out. There was a burden that I took on as a Black male, supporting young Black and Latino students with similar backgrounds as me and with similar experiences. And it was hard being one of the few people that those students felt like that they could come to. It was incredibly difficult on a day-to-day basis to absorb their trauma, to absorb their lives and feel a way like you can't and feel almost hopeless that you can't do everything within your power to help them out of their circumstances, because there are external factors that prevent us from being able to do the things that we really need to do. And so with so many other opportunities out there, folks are like, why put myself through this? Why sacrifice my mental health for something where I'm seeing little rewards? And a lot of folks are just done. And so when we say, where are they leaving? They're going all over the place. We got a lot of folks going into healthcare. We have some folks going into the tech side of things. What else? A lot of folks are doing consulting now, actually. They're doing independent work and doing like tutoring on the side, doing small cohorts of teaching with students, and that's become a lot more popular. Yeah, they're going wherever, they're finding an alternative passion because their initial passion was too much to bear.
Janae, are you okay if I chime in? A lot of what I'm going to say is going to echo, I think, what Ronald has just said. But and what I'm about to say too is only for me. I cannot speak for every independent school, and I cannot speak for every employee at my independent school. So this is strictly just my experience. I have been fortunate in that I feel very supported where I teach. I think that if I were teaching at the same school where when I was a student there, I wouldn't feel the same way. I do think the school has grown. Is it where it needs to be? No, but I do think it has grown, and I do think it's trying. But I think what it comes down to, if I could just use the word that kind of encapsulates all that Ronald just said, is respect. Teachers are not respected. And I say that on a lot of terms. So when Ron brought up the salary piece, now you have people just bringing in anybody off the street to be a teacher because of the fact that people are leaving. And they think that it's that easy to replace someone who actually did go to school, did acquire the skills to effectively manage a classroom and effectively convey content to their students. So you have the disrespect in salary, you have the disrespect from parents, and it can go from anywhere from COVID. And COVID was rough on all of us, but what teachers were expected to do, to now with the DEI efforts and trying to silence those. And teachers have also, as Ron said, it's a burden. Like, teachers have now been asked to be the mother, the father, the social worker, the babysitter, the nurse, like all of these things to children, which is not what we signed on for when we decided to go into this profession. And there's not another profession that I can think of where you're asked to do so much, when really it's a reflection of larger society ills, like where we need to have, okay, this is me on my little political rant, but where you need to have universal health care, you need to have universal pre-K, you need to have childcare, universal childcare. And unfortunately, teachers become the target when a kid is sick, cannot be at school. It's our fault, but in reality, it's a greater societal ill that's being reflected in that we aren't giving families all that they need to really effectively support their families. Again, I am fortunate in that where I am, there has not been a lot of turnover in Black females, and some may think that that's odd, because you don't think a predominantly white independent school, less turnover all the time. But I've had a pleasant experience. The teachers that have left, for the most part, have stayed in education, but have just advanced in another way. So they haven't left the education field. So it's not worn them out. It's just that they found a different way to be in that space.
Can I add to that? I agree 100% with what Kamille is saying. I don't know that I'm pretty positive in saying that the teachers who have decided to leave the profession will say that it's not about the kids. The kids are what holds them there, and the thing that pushes them out is everything else. It is really difficult to be a teacher right now, not only because of what Kamille said about just generally as a country, we really just don't respect teachers. We just don't believe that what they're doing is, I guess, I feel like people talk a lot of game about how great teachers are. We don't really put anything behind that. And all of the things that we have to deal with, like Kamille was talking about, are things that on a daily basis, kids come to school with trauma. And when you have classrooms that have 25 kids that are bringing 25 different, traumas, it's really difficult. And in order to reach them in the classroom, you have to have a relationship with them. And being able to have a relationship means that you need to be part of, the deconstruction of whatever that trauma is, which also is that, secondary trauma that's, that falls upon you. And then, especially for public schools, I'm not really sure what happens with private schools and charter schools, but sure, charter schools, but testing and data and, teachers really have to produce, if we're not producing test scores that, meet a certain criteria, then apparently we're not doing our job. It's just that simple. If we can't make the grade in terms of test scores, everyone in the country judges us on whether or not we're able to do our job. And that makes it really difficult considering there's so many other factors that come into play with what we do day in and day out.
All right, that was a great round. So the next question on the list, I'm actually going to try to incorporate a couple things that have come up in the chat into this one too. So the question as we had it before was, what are ways that others, especially managers or leaders, can foster environments that don't lead to high turnover and that promote good values in spaces? And so I want to connect to that, the question that we had in the chat that asked, do you ever worry as a Black educator about being pigeonholed as the DEI person? And do we think that the widespread institutional emphasis on DEI will continue? And I'm actually going to add another question into that, or just another option. And this question was specifically, how can PWIs better set up BIPOC faculty to succeed? So for all the reasons that those questions are connected, I think, James, if we could start with you as a DEI director and someone who might be interested in these questions, that would be great.
Absolutely. So there's a couple of pieces that I would say that, again, connect to all those questions that you just asked together. I think, and it connects something, again, that Ronald said earlier in terms of just thinking about, and Taj, I see your question in there too that I wanted to respond to. I think there's a couple of things. I think that as often as people of color and specifically Black faculty, when you're one of few in schools, you do sort of become a place that where many students of color will come to share that information and process and feel that validation and sort of be held. And sort of, I think it's important for managers or those in the schools, number one, to recognize that other labor that is happening in addition to the work that we're doing in terms of teaching our classes or whatever else. So there's this additional, I don't necessarily want to call it a burden, but additional work for sure that comes with it. So recognizing that. And I think for, again, managers and whatnot to recognize that and sort of, be able to own for that in terms of the ways that we compensate, in terms of the ways that we assign responsibilities, but also in the ways that we hold the rest of our faculty, our white faculty, accountable as well for being able to do this work, that sort of the DEI work doesn't just fall directly to faculty of color. Now, again, I have DEI in my title, so in some ways it does fall to me. But again, making sure that for those for whom it is not the case, that it is a communal held responsibility in the entire community. This question again too about whether or not that is a value that schools will hold and that we will see that moving forward. I think that's a question. And I think it really varies wildly from school to school, from district to district in terms of what that commitment is. So in terms of things as educators for us to think about, again, I've been lucky enough to be able to sort of determine when the place that I'm in is walking the walk and talking the talk or not. And certainly then being able to sort of determine whether or not that's a place I want to stay based upon the commitment that I see there and whether or not I see harm being done to children. I did some research a little while ago and I wrote an article about why people of color were leaving sort of their positions in schools. And again, some of the things that came up was sort of that sense of watching the damage that was being inflicted or having the same conversations over and over again without necessarily seeing progress. So I think that, again, there needs to be demonstrated progress. There needs to be some held accountability towards shared work and responsibility in this, and making sure that all of our teachers value this, that they, especially if you are in situations when you are working with children of color, I think that's really a capacity that everybody really needs to have, and that we as leaders need to demand that of everybody. And again, put forward the professional development, the resources, the in-service, whatever, to support and get to that place as well. And also, don't hire people who don't have that capacity, right? We're talking about the ways that sort of, because of this teacher shortage, we really have relaxed a lot of sort of the standards that we are having. And we actually can't afford to do that. We really do want to make sure that people are growing and coming in with this capacity and this skill set. And then lastly, to the question about whether or not I worry about the pigeonhole piece, sometimes, but more often than not, I think this work is important and it's crucial to be done, so I don't worry about that. But I've also been really lucky enough to see over the years people who were sort of specifically in DEI roles assume higher leadership positions in different schools, to go on to be sort of deans of students and principals and heads of schools. So again, it used to be something that I worried about. I remember early in my career people saying, don't ever have diversity, anything put on your title, because it will be a trap. And so fortunately, I've been able to see ways in other schools and systems and things where that has not proven to be true. But again, ultimately, I think it's really crucial work. So I'm never afraid of having it on there officially, especially knowing that it'll be a part of it unofficially, even if it's not, whether or not it's there on the roll.
Thank you, James. All right, y'all, we're down to our last 5 official minutes. And so we're going to end with one question for all. What I want to offer too is for folks who have to leave right at 8:30, we won't cry too hard. So go ahead and do that, but we're likely to go just a little over. So for this last question for all, if you choose 1 or 2 of these options, there are 3 questions here. What have you learned to center and value in this work? How have you stretched and grown and or surprised yourself in this profession? And or what lesson do you wish you had learned earlier? So if we could end with those, I think that might be a good way to bring this to an end. And we did not discuss who was going to start this one off, but maybe Hope. Let's go.
I was going to ask you to repeat the questions.
It's in the chat.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Okay, maybe not Hope. Let's go.
Yeah.
Or unless, yeah, maybe we'll go with Kamille. You just unmuted.
Yes. So yeah, this is not meant to sound selfish. What I've learned to center and value in this work is me. I have got to take care of myself, and some people ask, thank you, Ron. Some people have asked, what is it that keeps you here? That I have to take care of self. And I know we've all heard it's kind of become kind of trite, but you can't pour from an empty cup. You can't pour from an empty cup. If anybody follows me on Facebook or anything, and people who know me and laugh at me, exercise is my jam. Like, I have to exercise at least 5 days a week, 45 minutes a day. And that comes first, and I have to do it. And it's not just the physical aspect, it has to do with the mental and the emotional well-being. And sometimes it's hard. Like, sometimes I find myself, it's hard to say no. But now that I have children, a child in 8th grade, a child in 5th grade, I have a new position. And my children are at the school where I teach, but they're Black selves, and like trying to look out for them too. I've got to look out for me and my family. And then after that, what I've been surprised about is the fact that I am now an administrator. I think that sometimes I doubt myself. I think we all do. And I think that sometimes that I don't see myself as others might see me. And I've learned that it's okay to give myself some flowers sometimes. Like, it's okay to celebrate self and to believe that I'm capable, because if I don't believe I'm capable, then no one else will. And they can instantly pick up on that lack of confidence. I always say that sometimes this is not meant to be down on students or parents, but they can sense fear, they can sense a lack of confidence. And so sometimes you have to just make that the center. And yes, I love that quote. But I really do think that before you go into this, you have to center you, and it's not a selfish thing to do. And then from there, you can be what you need to be for everybody else. And then you can know when it's time to step away from those who are toxic.
Can I jump in here? That's something that I'm really working on, is learning how to center myself. I will not tell you for 1 minute that I am good at it. I was not trained to be good at it in this education world. I was actually trained not to think about the self. So having to sort of deprogram that for myself has been a 21-year battle. But one other thing that I feel is really important for me to center in order for me to continue my longevity in public schools is centering my philosophy, what I believe to be true about children and what I believe to be true about how they learn. And I think it's really important for me to always remember that the thing that's the most important for me is helping children to figure out and learn and realize the importance of their voice. Every single thing that I do is focused on giving them the information or helping them ask the questions so that they understand that they actually have a place in the world and that their opinion matters. And even though they're Black and brown, they're the ones who are going to be creating the world that we live in moving forward, and actually helping them to feel empowered enough to believe that they can create a world that reflects what it is that they want. That is something that has been unwavering for me since I became a teacher. And I feel like that's the thing that guides me. I don't think that there are a lot of obstacles that come in the way of having a philosophy like that, but I think
We might have. Can y'all still hear Hope? Or
No, I think
No, she's frozen.
oh,
Right as she was about to drop some
he's
wisdom.
gone.
Right.
He sure was. He sure was.
I know, I was all eager. I'm like, come on.
Oh man. I'm sure she'll hop back on. well, as she hopped back on, I'll take a stab at answering the question. So similar to what Kamille said, you definitely have to, for me, I experienced burnout, and I never want to experience burnout again. And so what I had to learn was to grant myself some grace and say that I'm doing enough, and really knowing that I truly am doing enough, like not just, half-assing it or whatever the case may be, but that you're doing your due diligence to make sure that you're doing right by our young people. And so in that same vein, remembering the why. Education is purpose-driven work. And I think so many people tend to forget that. And even in my most recent experience in the with Milwaukee Public Schools and their HR department, there are a lot of folks who forgot that. They forgot that although we're in HR and yes, we're serving the staff, we're still serving the students. And you have to be able to make those connections so that your work is that much more impactful. You have to. There's no, if you don't, then you're missing the point. You're missing the mark, and you're going to always miss the mark. You're going to miss the mark in how you serve, your various staff members, and people are going to not like you. And so what I'm trying to do now, as I continue to learn my HR chops and everything, is redefine what HR looks like in education. It doesn't have to be this separate autonomy place where people just are like, oh, that's HR, they're the HR police, they're coming to rain down on me. No. I want our folks to be in the schools. I want our folks to volunteer with students. I want our folks to really know what teachers are doing in the classroom, because again, we have to be able to hire those folks. We have to be able to know who we are looking for. We're looking for folks with the mindset and with the beliefs and that all students can succeed, and that all students can succeed at high levels. Those are the people that we're looking for. And if we're just looking for a person to fill a body, then again, we're missing the mark. And even if we do that, we have to be intentional as like a human resource department and as part of the professional development to train folks up. We have to recognize that folks are coming in with deficiencies, whether it's DEI related, some content related, classroom management, or whatever the case may be, and help bridge the gap. And so that's what a good manager will do. But you have to be aware of that. And so our good managers, they also need coaching and mentoring. I was a part of a program called the Burke Fellowship, and that's where I earned my principal license and director of instruction. And I wouldn't be the person that I am now without strong mentorship. And so there are a lot of people who really and truly have to humble themselves and say, hey, help me out. Help me see around the corner, push my thought, challenge my thinking. And that'll be the way that we can rethink education and rethink how we support our staff so that we can better support our students in the communities that where they live.
Ron, you went all the way off. I was ready to chime in. To what Kamille and Ron have said, as selfish as it might sound, you have to center your wellness. And I mean that in a lot of ways. You hear a lot of teachers, and I would say especially women teachers, especially Black teachers, who literally get sick in this profession. And I have taken seriously, especially in these past couple of years, as one of those people who has gotten sick. The call to take care of me here, everywhere. And I think the other thing that I would say, and this is, I think people joke, I think I'm joking when I say Whitney Houston's the greatest love of all is why I teach. But it matters to me to believe and to remember and to know that the people we are teaching now are going to lead the way. And it's interesting to think about them as leading the way now. So there's something to be said about staying open and curious, and remembering that we can also learn from them. And then there's this other piece that I think it's easy to take for granted, that it matters to their learning experience that we actually believe in them, not fake believe in them, that we believe in their possibilities, their potential. And just this idea, I have really worked to practice this unconditional positive regard, which doesn't mean that you're not demanding, which doesn't mean that people won't be held accountable, but it means that in all of that, I have to, it's my job, I think, to believe that there is something different and better for you whatever that looks like. And so that has mattered to me a lot. And I try to keep that central to the day-to-day work. And James, I think you're taking us home. Is that right?
I think so in some ways. Well, and I'm going to echo a lot of what's already been said here. So just in the 2 points, what I wish I learned earlier has been some of what you've all been saying, both to learning how to say no in terms of the requests and things that come to you, and learning how to prioritize yourself and your own health and well-being. That's something I can't say that I've mastered yet, that I definitely, like Hope said, I'm still struggling with some of that, because you want to be helpful. You want to be of service. You want to, if there's a need you see, you want to be able to fill it, especially when it's dealing with kids and their support. But again, as Kamille said, you can't pour from an empty cup. So really making sure to prioritize, again, taking care of yourself, saying no, recognizing that, especially in a school setting, if we're doing this well, if I'm not there in that moment, there's some other teacher who's going to be able to step up and sort of pick up the slack, that it takes all of us to do this. So I think just really learning how to prioritize my well-being is something that I'm still learning and wish I had learned to do sooner and earlier. And then what was the other part of it? One of the other ones, I lost it.
They're far up now.
Because I had a great answer for it too. Oh, the other one, how have you stretched? I think that one of the things that I've stretched, and again, in some ways, I don't know that looking back, the career that I have is not necessarily what I would have imagined, and certainly not necessarily being in education and in leadership roles in the ways that I have over the years. I'm someone who still grapples with some anxiety around public speaking and those sorts of things. So as much as I have to do it as part of my work, it's definitely a stretch in some ways to do that. And then also the ways that I've continued in education. Again, many of us on the call are first gen. And so that sense of having gone to and graduated from Kenyon, but then continued into grad school, and then just having completed my doctorate 2 years ago. These are things that I didn't necessarily imagine and envision for myself, but really were ways that I stretched and continued to grow and pursue sort of, knowledge. And again, to model that sort of work and that curiosity that we hope for our kids to have. So I think those are some of the ways that I've definitely, again, grown and both stretched myself over the career in ways that I would not have expected, but have been really both privileged and grateful for having the opportunity to do. And Kenyon was a big part of that.
Hope is back. So Hope is actually taking us home.
Sorry about that. So we're in the middle of nowhere in a cabin, and I'm running this off of my cell phone. So sometimes the connection's not great. I think the only thing that I would say, just piggybacking off of what James said, is just the importance of self-care. But also the thing that surprised me the most about teaching is that, when I got into this, I said, I'm going to do this until it's not fun anymore. And I'm still doing it. Now, that's all true, given all of the problems with the district and the problems with, the bureaucracy of teaching and how people don't really respect teachers and all of that. But just the fact that I still love it is something that is surprising to me after 21 years. And I cannot imagine myself stopping anytime soon. And I think that means a lot. And that fuels me, because I feel like I may have chosen the right career for myself. And how lucky am I to have had the self-knowledge to know that this is the right thing for me. And so I would say that's the most, I thought that I had other things on my plan. Like I'm a classroom teacher. I teach public school, 5th grade and 4th grade. And that's what makes me, sort of my currency is thought, and how important it is for kids to learn. And that inspires me every single day. And I think that's really awesome.
Thank you. All right. So Emily, am I passing it back to you to bring it fully to a close?
Yes. Thank you, Janae.
I didn't see you. Wow. Sorry.
No, you're fine. You're fine. I would just like to give a big thank you to the 5 of you, James, Kamille, Janae, Ronald, and Hope. I think I speak for